Start or? We're waiting on participants.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Now I am here. Sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zoltán Koleszár. In light of the transition to Alpha Sigma, I am replacing Marina Sheldon to host today's Meet the Expert session. Meet the Expert sessions are being organized to help us all better understand the disease journey and the impact on a person's life. This is a nice reminder of why and for whom we are doing what we are doing here at Galapagos. At today's session, we will have the wonderful opportunity to listen to Benita's experience on living with dermatomyositis. I have also the pleasure to introduce you to Professor Rohit Agrawal from University of Pittsburgh, who will facilitate the conversation with Benita. Towards the end of the session, we will foresee sufficient time for a question and answer session, which will be coordinated by Heidi Müller. Please be prepared to put forward your questions. You can do so via the question and answer throughout the webinar. Many thanks, both accepted this invitation. Please note that the meeting is recorded and some part of it will be shared at social media. I'm switching off my camera now to ensure one-to-one virtual communication and will join back after your last question. Without further delaying, I would like to ask Professor Agrawal to start the conversation, and may I please ask you before we start to briefly introduce yourself? Thanks.
Thanks, Zoltan. Well, thanks a lot for this opportunity to participate in the Meet the Expert session. I'm Rohit Agrawal. I'm a professor of medicine, a rheumatologist at University of Pittsburgh. I'm also co-director of UPMC Myositis Center. I wanted to, thank Benita for joining this session. Most importantly, I'll be asking very tough questions to Benita to see, and I'm really happy that she's here to share her experience. So as a matter of introduction, Benita, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, I'm Benita Moyers. I live close to Huntsville, Alabama. I'm 50 years old. I used to be a kindergarten teacher and trainer for Google and various other education jobs that I did for a while. I have anti-MDA5 positive dermatomyositis, which I was diagnosed with in 2020. And I also volunteer with Myositis Support and Understanding, where I serve on their board of directors as secretary, and recently took over as vice president. And I appreciate you allowing me to share my story today. I think it's really important to have a patient voice in these things, and I'm honored that you selected me for this. I think you're muted.
Yep. Thanks, Benita, for that kind introduction. You and me have already talked a lot about your disease, and I've had opportunity to ask a lot of questions about your disease in our previous interactions. But for this webinar, let's begin with what kind of symptoms do you have now? How do you feel nowadays? How do you feel these days?
I feel a little better compared to in the beginning. I still struggle with getting stability. I have not had what people kind of, consider a calm period. I keep having these little bouts that come about every time I get sick. You can still see a little bit of the redness and stuff on my face and on my chest, but my skin is doing a lot better than it was in the beginning. The most trouble that I have is with my lungs. Which comes along with the MDA5, that's just something that attacks the most. I do have some muscle issues that kind of creep up every now and then, so I fall. I don't have as much muscle problems as other dermatomyositis patients, but I do have some issues. So it's kind of a day-to-day thing. I'll have some really good periods where I'm doing well and I can get out, and then I have some that are not. So today is a good day today. So I'm glad it's a good day for me to be here with you all.
So if I understand correctly, your primary symptoms currently are obviously continuing to have some skin problems and lung problem, but muscle seems to be somewhat more settled at this point of time. Could you tell me how the dermatomyositis presently impact your life?
In the beginning?
No, currently, how does it impact your life?
Oh, I still can't work. The doctors prefer for me not to be around children, obviously because of my lungs, but also just because of fatigue and stamina. It's difficult for me to stand for a long period of time, to do a lot of walking. My lungs and my voice give out quite a bit. So I'm not able to work. That also impacts, doing stuff with my family and with my friends as well. So it has a pretty significant impact. And that's not counting trips to the doctors and things like that.
So even though you're feeling a lot better than what you were, it still severely impacts your activities of daily living and impact your life.
Yes.
You touched upon it a little bit. So let me just ask you that. You said that there are good days and bad days. Could you talk about a little bit more about how your symptoms fluctuate over time? Because a lot of our patients tell us that, but honestly, as a doctor, it is a little difficult to understand. And so we would like to know a little bit more from you, the fluctuation of symptoms.
Sure. So for example, when it comes to the muscles, there's sometimes where I have no pain. I don't have a lot of weakness. I can actually walk a little bit more if it wasn't for my lungs or my heart palpitations. But then there's some days I wake up and I'm in just a lot of pain. It's kind of hard to even describe. It's almost like I used to lift weights when I was younger. It's almost like I've worked out really, really hard and I have the flu times 10 on top of it. It's like a deep, deep muscle pain that it just hurts to even roll over, or to get up out of a chair. One day I can get out of the chair easy and the next day I'm struggling. It's worse if I catch a cold or if I've been around somebody that's sick. That tends to send everything off. Just the slightest cold just wreaks havoc with my whole body. Even my skin will start to break out more. And temperature seems to affect it. So right now we're having a really cold wave. And so my joints are another thing that's affected. So the joint pain is a lot worse in the winter. So I struggle with even fine motor skill things in the winter with my hands and things like that. So lots of things can affect it if I've been out in the sun too much. That even affects. So what I do from day to day varies. It makes it difficult to even promise to do anything with family and friends because I don't know how I'm going to feel until I get up.
I see. So every day comes in with a different challenge for you. Some day could be more of a joint or skin problem or more of a lung problem or just fatigue. So that's really nice of you to kind of talk so openly about all the issues you're currently facing. Now that we have a good understanding of where you are currently in your disease, I want to take you in past a little bit. If you can, from your memory, tell us a little bit more about how did your dermatomyositis first present? When you were first told by your doctors that your health issues are related to myositis, tell us more about at that time of point, how you felt and what were your presenting symptoms and so on.
Well, when it first happened, I actually had a few weird things just happening through the years that nobody could explain. I would just occasionally get a rash right here. They kept saying, oh, it must be lupus, but I never had any positive antibodies. I would get pneumonia just randomly, and it would take forever to get over. And they said, oh, well, it's asthma, or you're just, have a weak immune system, something like that. And it was just all these weird things. I had a weird swollen finger. I still have it now, but they thought it was bone cancer. They couldn't figure out what it was. Later found out it was calcinosis. And I just kept getting worse and worse. I kept feeling like something was off, and was sent to a rheumatologist who just kept looking at my blood panel and said, oh, you must be fine. And I said, I'm not fine. I'm struggling to get off the floor with my classroom and with my students. All of a sudden I went from walking 2 to 3 miles a day to I couldn't walk to the mailbox without losing my breath. And it was all these random things, and nobody could put it together. Until one day I woke up in a lot of pain, and I was driving to school, and I could not grip my steering wheel. I had to drive like this with my palms. And I got to school and just broke into tears. I was in so much pain. I couldn't hold my mouse. I couldn't hardly walk across my classroom. And I called my doctor, my general practitioner, and I said, you have to get me a new rheumatologist. Something is not right. It's not rheumatoid. It's not lupus. It's got to be something else. I do have autoimmune things that run in my family. And she sent me to another person. And of course, she saw all my rashes and things like that. And she had just read about myositis. And she said, well, I don't know if this is what it is, but she says, we've got to figure this out. And she ran the panel and found it. But even then, she didn't know what to do. So it took me getting to the point of barely being able to walk, barely being able to breathe, and me reaching out to another hospital to get help. I literally couldn't hardly sit up by that point for very long. Luckily, it was Christmas break and I wasn't teaching by that point, but I could barely walk from my bedroom to the living room and had to lay down. And my family, it scared them. They didn't know what was wrong.
Yeah.
So it was really bad there for a while. I mean, my fingers were awful. Around my nail beds were awful. So there was just pain everywhere. You know, everything hurt. Everything itched. Yeah. There was no relief whatsoever. So it was really bad in the beginning.
So this is very interesting, because in your case, you actually were seeing a rheumatologist, telling the rheumatologist about all these, little but significant issues that you have had with your skin or your joints or, breathing. Yet it, took that rheumatologist a while, and then you had to change doctors to kind of get to the right diagnosis. And I hear this all the time, which kind of makes me wonder that there is significant lack of education amongst the doctors themselves and amongst the rheumatologists, neurologists, and dermatologists. Forget about, it will be very difficult. If it was primary care doctor, I could understand, but we need to do better job in educating our rheumatologists, neurologists, and dermatology colleagues. And I think part of the problem, I can tell, is due to the lack of emphasis on these diseases or rare diseases in our medical education. When we are studying medical education, we talk about, big diseases like heart and cancer, but there's very rare or very little discussion about these autoimmune issues. And I think that needs to be addressed. But thanks for sharing that. But I want to also ask you a few more questions about the diagnosis, because I hear this again and again, the diagnosis delay. For the time point when you were diagnosed, you had a diagnosis, what happened? Did you already said that you faced difficulty, but can you elaborate a little bit more about the difficulties and delays that you faced in your diagnosis? Because I think I want to understand, how long did it take for you? What difficulties did you actually face as a patient to get to the right diagnosis?
Well, of course, it took almost a year of all these weird signs popping up. I'd seen a dermatologist, I had seen a neurologist. I'd actually been seeing a neurologist for years for restless leg syndrome and stuff. And he had run an EMG years ago. When this first even popped up with the blood work panel, he argued that I didn't have it because I had a negative EMG before. I had a pulmonologist who just kept blaming everything on asthma and things, and nobody was putting two and two together. And even when I had this blood work, the doctor said, well, I think this is mostly a dermatological issue. I think you need to see a dermatologist. Of course, we're getting close to Christmas, and the dermatologist is like, well, I don't know what this is. And we're getting into the part where COVID was starting to come in, and neither one of them was going to see me until after Christmas. And in fact, I was at school one day, and one of my coworkers come in, and I was slumped on the table, just exhausted. And the nurse came in, she was checking my oxygen, it was low. And they were like, you've got to do something. And I took it upon myself to just research different centers that dealt with myositis. And I reached out to one and said, is there anybody in the South I can see? And they just happened to get me into somebody really quick. But I went from the time they found the blood work at least another month before I was even put on any kind of medicine at all. So I was rapidly getting worse. Even when I found somebody that knew about myositis, it still took a while to come up with things that would work for me. But overall, from the time of the first symptoms, it was probably a year or more from just the first general symptoms. And like I said, I just kept getting worse and worse, more symptoms popped up, and that kind of thing. And nobody put it together, not even my lung doctor, which was probably the worst thing at the time was my breathing. And that's what got, and even my ferritin levels were high, and nobody put that together either.
I see. Yeah. So it took you a year. And one thing I want to point out about a myositis, and especially when it involves lungs and skin and muscle, is that the damage keeps occurring. So that 1 year that you were struggling to find diagnosis, your body is over the time is getting damaged, and it is very difficult to reverse the damage that you have in your lungs, in your muscle and skin. So I think it's very important that we need to decrease the time in which we can come up with the final diagnosis. And in your case, it's amazing because you were seeing a neurologist, you were seeing a pulmonologist, then you saw a dermatologist. So I want to emphasize these points. You were seeing all the right doctors.
Right.
Yet it took you a year. And then you finally saw a rheumatologist, and then you had to see another rheumatologist. So the struggle that you've had between 5 different doctors over a year or so to come to a final diagnosis is what I hear a lot from my other patients as well. And I'm really thankful for you for sharing that in detail. So moving on, how do you imagine your life to evolve after diagnosis? So tell a little bit more about what were you thinking at that point?
Well, it terrified me at first because if they didn't really say a lot to me about what it was. So I was just kind of left to research. Of course, they didn't really know what to do about it either. And of course, if you look on Google, and especially MDA5, it's terrifying. So thoughts of how long do I have is in my head. What am I going to do? I only have so much sick leave. They're talking about all these, possible treatments. And I'm thinking, how am I going to do this and work full time and have a family? So I was terrified. In fact, that's when I reached out to MSU because I was just desperate. There was not enough patient-friendly information out there for me to have any peace. So I was terrified at first. As we kept going, I became extremely frustrated because I had doctors that were in denial about it. As I mentioned, my neurologist, he just flat out denied it, didn't want to do any further testing, didn't want to work with the rest of the team because he was actually in a different hospital system. And so he did not want to collaborate, which made it more difficult. I was kind of put in the middle and asked to communicate like, well, you need to go see this kind of doctor and ask him this, or you need to see this doctor and ask him this. So instead of referring me to somebody and sending my notes, I was, told to communicate and that kind of thing. And so I just became very, very frustrated, which did not help my illness. We were in the height of COVID. And so everything was just awful as a teacher, trying to teach kindergartners online. And part of me was just like wanting to throw my hands up and say, whatever. And then the other part was like, no, I'm going to fight this and just really push and advocated for myself and had to basically find new doctors. But a lot of patients are scared to do that. They're scared to say, well, I've had this doctor forever. I've got to stick with this doctor. And I had to really stop and say, well, I've had this doctor, but he's not helping me. So I've got to move on. And so it was just a lot of struggle emotionally to deal with all of that and to deal with so many doctors, so many tests. I had no idea how many tests I would go through. And still go through. It was overwhelming. And if I had to do it over, I would just beg and plead for more information in the beginning because I didn't have that. It was just, and part of that was due to COVID. It really was. It was crazy. But it was hard to set goals because there was not a lot of information given to me.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't all their fault. It was not there, to have.
Makes sense. Well, thanks for sharing that. Once you were diagnosed, in what ways you discussed the treatment with your with your doctor? Did you set any goals or priorities? What's important to you? How did your doctor discuss the selection of treatment with you? Let's talk about post-diagnosis, a little bit more about treatment discussion. How did it go?
Well, in the beginning, it was just, it was a rush to take care of the lungs because I already had some atelectasis in the bottom of both lungs. It was getting worse. My lung function was going down. So that was the top priority. So she didn't really give me a lot of options in the beginning. She just said, we've got to do something quick. Put me on a high dose of steroids, really, really high dose. I didn't think I was going to survive just the steroids alone, to be honest with you. And then one immune suppression medicine, and tried to get some stability. And after a month or two, she was like, okay, we've got this one in your system. Now let's add another one. So she did a very gradual step. But in the meantime, I was getting a little bit worse and worse. And so this doctor was, I live in Alabama. This doctor was in Tennessee, and it was getting very difficult for me to go up there and to travel. So I reached out to some myositis patients, and I said, I've got to have somebody closer, or at least in Alabama. So when I switched to the University of Alabama in Birmingham, they had a whole team there. It's like a rheumatologist, dermatologist team. And when they took over, they both sat down with me and they collaborated together to come up with a treatment plan. And when they did, they, asked me, what I felt like doing, what I felt like taking. I was starting to have a lot of stomach issues and other issues at the time. And we all discussed it together along with my general practitioner. And that helped me a lot decide. And now I'm on 3 immune suppression medicines and infusions, but I'm off of the steroids. And that was my goal, was to get off the steroids, because it caused a whole other set of issues and everything. But they work together with me. They don't do anything separate. And that has made the biggest difference. And that's my goal, is to continue to make sure that, we work together as a team, because it's too difficult to do this when you have things going in different directions, different medicines from different doctors that are counteracting each other. So you have to play an active role as the patient and make sure that you know what you're taking and how it interacts, but you have to talk, it has to be a lot of communication. And that's the hardest part, to get it to, to get to that point. It really, really is.
So seems like you had a lot of difficulties early on, but in the end, you were lucky that your doctors were listening to you. They make plan, including you. There was a team of doctors talking to you, and a lot of time, I think that's what's needed. Could you talk a little bit more about the difficulties or side effects from the treatment that you received?
Well, of course, in the beginning, the steroids were just horrible. They were really messing with my heart, causing palpitations, a lot of severe tremors, things like that. Some of the immune suppression medicines were very difficult on the stomach. I'd had a lot of stomach issues growing up anyway. Well, just mainly acid reflux and stuff, but it really, really aggravated a lot of that. So we had to kind of play around with which one I could handle. We also had to we had to worry about one medicine in particular that has a lot of side effects with other medicines. So some of them would be like just excruciating headaches. A lot of it was abdominal nausea issues and stuff like that. Then when I started the infusions, there was a lot more side effects, a lot more fatigue that would come after it, things like that. So I can pretty much count on, if it's an infusion week, not feeling good for a couple of days. But to me, it's worth it, because when I miss one, the symptoms are much worse. So it's one of those things where you have to weigh the pros and cons, and depending on how severe some of your stuff is. And my choice was to go ahead and try to, have the longevity, and deal with some of the symptoms, but there's definitely some side effects with all this.
Thanks for sharing that. In myositis, it's not just about muscle, and oftentimes it's not just about muscle and skin. We often see other organ problems that we call as comorbidities. Can you explain what does it mean to you personally, and what difficulty did you face from the comorbidity standpoint?
One of the biggest ones I think that I went through was I started having a lot of swelling. And they ended up diagnosing me with lymphedema, and I'd never had surgery or anything like that. Wasn't diabetic or anything. We started noticing it, especially if I had a lot of saline with my infusions and that kind of thing. That was probably the worst one because it actually made walking worse. It made the muscle pain worse. Once we started, I ended up getting, since I got diagnosed, I got sent home with a home compression machine, and that has worked wonders. But I also ended up having a lot of heart palpitations, really, really bad. They had to put a loop monitor in to record them because they were getting so severe. As you can hear, my voice gets gravelly. So I had to have speech therapy because I had started having dysphagia and choking on things, having difficulty swallowing even my medicine. In my voice, it's like affected, one of my vocal cords doesn't want to work right anymore, and that kind of thing. Those were the two, probably the biggest. Actually, one other one was, and I'm still being tested for this, so they don't know for sure, but they're starting to suspect that I have gastroparesis now. That my stomach is not emptying as fast as it should. When they did a swallow test, I was filling up way too fast. And so that was causing a lot of issues. That was also causing me to aspirate a lot, which is not good for the lungs, and that kind of thing. So I had a lot of things that popped up afterwards. And I think, magnesium, that's what it was. I had to think for a minute. I started having a lot of magnesium deficiencies. Like I can't keep it up. So I have to take a lot of magnesium supplements, which also doesn't help the stomach. But it was affecting my heart and my muscles and my neuropathy, restless leg. It was causing tons of chaos. And we haven't quite figured out why we can't keep that up, but that's all happened since I was diagnosed. And then just increased neuropathy issues that I always had a little bit of, but they're a lot worse. And then I've also started getting like a numbness in one side that they can't explain. The brain scan, MRI looked okay and things like that. And so they don't know if it has something to do with the DM or what it is. So they're monitoring that. But there's been several things that have popped up from it that we're having difficulty treating too, because we have to watch what medicines I take with other medicines.
Yeah, absolutely. You didn't touch upon the lungs because that would be probably a big comorbidity for you as well.
Yes, I consider it part of it, honestly. I have permanent.
I mean, that's part of the disease, I guess.
Yeah, that's actually been one of the biggest ones. And I have to go every 3 months to get them checked. My PFTs have kind of stabilized a little bit for right now, but they were like steadily dropping for a while. They tried to put me on oxygen for a little while, and insurance has been an issue because I can actually hold it up some during the day. One doctor thinks that I've learned to compensate for that scar tissue, and I can kind of keep it up, but as soon as I sit down or get in any restful position, it just can drop into the low 80s. So we're battling insurance for oxygen, but I was on it for a short time when I was in the hospital after I had COVID. It scared them. They didn't think I would survive it with the dermatomyositis. But fortunately I did. But the lungs are definitely permanently scarred. So I have a lot of breathing issues when I try to walk too far, that kind of thing. And some days are worse than others. That's the part that scares me the most, is how fast that can change.
Pretty sure. Yeah, I mean, having shortness of breath and being on oxygen, even if temporarily, can really scare anybody. So looking at your future, how do you see your disease evolving? Is there anything regarding your disease that you're particularly worried about now?
Well, I continue to worry about the lungs, especially when I try to get out more and do things. You know, I can only stay in the house so much. And the slightest thing sets it off. And once the lungs get set off, my whole body gets triggered. The whole disease, everything flares up. So I kind of live in a constant nervousness, I guess. I try not to live like in total fear. The first year, I did not leave the house at all. They didn't want me to. We were restricted who came in and that kind of thing. And so I've kind of started venturing out more, but it does make me nervous just because, you know, like I said, anything that could happen can happen very rapidly. The last time I did have pneumonia, I literally had an x-ray at 6 p.m. that night before. Woke up in the middle of the night struggling to breathe. Went to the emergency room and had double pneumonia, almost like severely, in just a matter of hours. That's how fast it hit. So that's my biggest concern. It's my lungs. I'm still pushing to keep walking and doing things like that. So there is a concern about maybe eventually having trouble walking. I do have falls occasionally, but the lungs is my biggest concern right now. The lungs and the heart, palpitations and things. I have had, I forgot I had, what do they call it now? I can't think of what it's called. The fluid around the heart for a little while. I had a little bit of issues with the heart there a while back. And that was very scary, especially since my dad had some heart issues and stuff. But I have a lot of goals to keep going and keep fighting it too. So I try not to live in total.
Does the skin, because I see that you still have mildly active skin, I think you told us that skin is also continues to be a good and bad days, and obviously perhaps joint. Does that worry you as well?
I don't worry about it as much. It used to bother me a lot in the beginning. Now I'm just kind of used to it. People kind of ask me questions about it. I worried a lot more in the beginning because I was getting like a little bit of ulcers and things on my hands. And so those are a lot better. I think the calcinosis in my finger worries me because it's come back. They had operated on it, took some of it down. It actually started looking like a normal finger. And it's coming back. And so it's getting to the point I can't use that finger again. So that kind of worries me of it spreading. Like there's another finger that looks like it wants to come to that. But it's like I said, the skin I can kind of live with. It's inconvenient. It's itchy. It burns. But compared to the other stuff, if I had to choose which one am I going to fight the hardest, it's going to be the lungs and the muscles so that I can still function day to day. I can kind of function with skin, even though it hurts sometimes, but it's the other stuff the worst.
No, makes sense. Now, what about your personal dreams, goals, ambitions? Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because we haven't talked about you as a person as well, so we want to know more about that as well.
I definitely want to. I started painting when I was first left work on disability. I couldn't stand it. I was used to being on the go all the time, and all of a sudden I was just homebound, you know, and I didn't like it. And I got to where I couldn't use my fingers well. And as a kindergarten teacher, I had taught a lot of fine motor skills with my students, and so I was determined I was going to do something to get that back because I couldn't even write my name for a while. I couldn't hold a pencil. And so I started painting. And so one of my goals is to continue painting and get better with that and to keep my hand function, to keep it, you know, where I can grip things and open things and stuff. But I miss traveling. I'd love to get healthy enough to travel again. They don't really like for me to fly right now very much because I tend to get pneumonia and stuff after I fly. And with COVID still being a little bit of an issue, that kind of keeps me from traveling, and even riding in the car too long can be very exhausting and painful. So I would like to get to the point where I can travel again. And then my daughter is she is seeing a guy that has a young kid, and hopefully I'll have some grandkids one day. I want to be able to do things with them. I want to be able to go to the park and, be able to go to the playground with them and things like that. And that kind of thing is hard. It's like I can do it sometimes if I've got a lot of places to sit and I rest a lot. But I can't keep up with them, and that bothers me a lot. So my goal is to get strength up to be able to do those things, and to continue fighting for myositis patients. I was always an education advocate, but now I've turned that over to advocating for patients. And I guess one of my goals is to see some better care for myositis patients, especially those with MDA5, like myself. So I probably won't go back to teaching again, but hopefully I can use what I've learned through the years to help other people with myositis.
Well, that's a great thought. Well, many thanks, Benita, for being with us today. This has been a very touching conversation, and I hope everybody would learn from your personal experience. And it's not an easy thing to come online and talk about your disease journey and your experiences. I'm going to now head back to Zoltan to see what are the remaining parts. Zoltan, I think you're on mute.
Thank you very much for both of you for the valuable interview. Before we start the question from the audience, can I ask one question from each of you? So, Professor Agarwal, can you tell us a bit more how the dermatomyositis presents itself in other patients? Could you give some examples or describe how their disease is different compared to Benita's?
Sure. I mean, I think this is a great question. So every dermatomyositis patient that I see present differently. For example, in case of Benita, she presented predominantly with lung symptoms, with some joint, muscle, skin was there. Her main problem in the beginning was lung. Many patients present to us with the main problem being muscle. They have difficulty in day-to-day activities like getting up from a chair, getting up from a toilet seat, bathing, clothing, So they have a lot of muscle weakness and muscle pain, the things that we think for granted, brushing or toileting, they have difficulty in those activities, going upstairs, getting up from chair. So a lot of patients present with muscle weakness. Many patients also at the same time of muscle weakness break out with severe rashes around their face, around their eyelids, scalp, back of their hands, sometimes the ulcers on the tips of the finger, deposits of calcium called calcinosis, rash on the upper chest, upper back. So a lot of rash. And these rashes are not just skin problems. They are painful, they are itchy, they are problematic. It's not like just a cosmetic issue. It's a really bothering symptom. It's a much more than just, redness. It's far more than that. But many other patients present with arthritis. I think Benita was saying that she had difficulty in gripping, and a lot of patients have painful joints, and a lot of times those get missed as rheumatoid arthritis or something else, but it is not. It could be part of this disease itself. Many patients present with a difficulty in swallowing because swallowing apparatus is also muscle. So what happens is the muscle gets weak and they're not able to keep their food down, or their food go in the wrong pipe and land up in their lung, developing pneumonias. So these are some varied features or various different presentations of the disease, which could be slightly different than Benita, but everybody has a different mix, basically, what I'm trying to say.
Thanks very much. Yeah. Benita, you are also an active member of the Patient Association for Dermatomyositis patients. As you know, we at Galapagos develop treatments to improve quality of life for patients like yourself. From your personal perspective, what would you recommend us as a biotechnology company to do? Is there anything specific that we should take into consideration in our drug development programs from your point of view?
Oh, definitely. As part of MSU, we hold a lot of support groups. And one of the things I hear over and over and over again is that nobody listens to our story. Like Dr. Agarwal said, the pain, even the itching, you know, even though I play it down as my least bothersome part, it's still, it's an itch and a pain and a burning you can't explain. And people are just, the patients need to be heard, because we all do have different symptoms. But it gets blown off as, oh, it's just a little itch, you can live with it. Or it's just a little muscle pain, it can't be that bad. Or, oh, it's just a little joint pain, it can't be that bad. But this is like pain and stuff that is almost indescribable. And just hearing that patient voice is really, really important. You know, like I said, it may be my least symptom, but it's because some of the medicines and stuff have helped to the point I can tolerate it. But another thing too is listening to the problems they have with the research studies. I actually could not participate in a research study. I was going to, but I was going to have to get off the one medicine that was keeping my lungs stable. And I was off of it for 2 weeks and like rapidly regressed. So I couldn't even try any new trials of any kind because I couldn't take it with that medicine. So that's a real scare for a lot of patients who have worked so hard to just get stable and get, you know, stay out of the hospital, that they're scared of placebos, especially. I won't try one anymore if I have to go on a placebo or take off that medicine, because it can get so bad so fast, and you don't want to get to the point of like no return and not be able to stabilize and get well and stuff. So placebos are a big scare for people in traveling. It is very difficult for myositis patients to travel, and I'm fortunate enough I can still walk and still drive, you know, short distances, but there's a lot that can't even get out of bed or get out their home. Traveling just wipes them out for a week at a time or more. I know Dr. Agarwal, you know, has been great to try to, you know, come up with solutions for that. But there's a lot of studies where it requires lots of travel and days of travel, and it's just not feasible for a lot of myositis patients. So keeping all those things in mind, but really listening to the patients who live it every single day is just really, really important. Because it, you know, even though we see our doctors and they know a lot, it's like, it's hard to understand it until you've gone through it. Even reading about it just doesn't live up to what we experience.
Yeah, thanks both. This was very interesting. Let's move to the question of the audience. Please feel free to put your questions into the Zoom Q&A section. And I'm giving the floor to Heidi.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Professor Agarwal and Benita, for your very, very touching story. We have already a couple of questions coming in. So let's immediately dive into that. Benita, the first question is for you. How can patient organizations be a support for patients from your experience?
Oh my goodness. They've been an amazing support. First of all, just from offering information about the disease in a patient-friendly language was a huge help in the beginning, especially when my family was asking questions. But the support groups are really what got me through it. They become like a family to you. They support you, they call you, they check on you, they listen to you. Because even your caregivers that are with you don't totally understand what you're going through. Only another patient really does. And that's gonna make me emotional. They are the only ones that have understood during my most difficult times. And if my doctor had not recommended them to me, I don't know how I would have made it through the first few months. Because the doctor that recommended to me, she's like, you can't do this alone. You can't. This disease is too hard. And I'm sorry, I said I wasn't going to get emotional, but it's the most difficult thing I've ever been through. And nobody, not even my closest family members, understand it. These support groups help each other through it. When somebody passes away, we're there for each other. We're there for their family. We help them find doctors if they're in an area where, like I even though I live in a pretty urban area, there's not a myositis center within 4 states of me, and just helping each other find that help and answering questions about symptoms. One thing I had trouble with my infusions, I was having really bad headaches and ended up in the hospital, and somebody recommended to me that they split theirs up to every other week. And so I went from having 4 days once a month in excruciating headaches to having my infusions 2 days every other week, and I can tolerate them. And that's when my health started getting better, by at least being able to tolerate my medicine. And I never would have thought of that if it hadn't been for this patient group. And my doctor didn't even think of it. I had to bring it up to her. So there's been so many, just not just emotional, but medical help. It's not that we can't really offer medical advice as, an organization, but just ideas from people of what worked for them. Because you grasp at straws with this disease, like what's going to work for me. And, the doctors can't always, especially if they don't know a lot about the disease, they don't know what to try. And so sometimes we're like, hey, somebody tried this. Is this an option? So at least gives them ideas of research to do or other doctors they can contact. So to me, it's a lifeline. And to a lot of the people I've talked to, it's a lifeline for each other. And I just can't express enough how important they are. And I honestly feel like every doctor should that has somebody with myositis should mention one of these groups. There's multiple groups, but I don't think any myositis patient should go without some kind of support. It's just too critical with this disease.
Thank you for sharing your experience so openly and so honestly with us. It's clear that only people who go through exactly the same path can truly understand what you're going through. So it's really great to see the support you can give to each other. Moving to the next question, also for you, Benita, related to your diagnosis. And the time it takes to get to a diagnosis, which is terribly long. Do you think that there is a role for pharmaceutical companies that can help in assisting patients and doctors with quicker diagnosis?
Oh, I think so. I mean, you all have such a powerful voice in the medical industry, just during your interactions, with medical experts and sharing the knowledge that you have, or even the knowledge of the patient groups, but just sharing that with doctors and medical professionals that maybe have not heard of this, participating in conferences, like you do, and sharing information and just networking. There's such a power in communication and networking and collaboration that you don't have when you stand alone. And that was true when I worked with educators and things like that, but it's true with you all as well, and just lobbying for treatments and for things, even with legislators, there's so much that pharmaceuticals and everybody can do to spread awareness with this disease and to share and help each other. That's what helped me with my doctors. I mean, one thing I didn't point out with MDA5, and I'm sure Dr. Agarwal has better knowledge of this than me, but the prognosis of MDA5 is not good the first year. And one of the things that I was told was like, well, the first 6 months is critical. We can't guarantee you past that. And that's why it's so important to get the word out there sooner so that diagnosis can be made sooner and the treatments, can get to these patients sooner. And if you have a treatment that might help, that needs to get out to these doctors, obviously. So communication and collaboration is just critical, I think, with the longevity of patients for this disease.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think we can add to that Professor Agarwal's perspective that also the education of medical doctors could be an area where we can help getting to a faster diagnosis. We have some time left for a couple of more questions. So I'd like to encourage the audience, if you have anything else in mind, to add your questions to the Q&A. And in the meanwhile, maybe I'd like to ask Professor Agarwal to comment. We heard from Benita that fatigue is one of the challenges in the lives of many, if not most, dermatomyositis patients. And when we are setting up trials, we are also looking in how can we make the life of our study participants as comfortable as possible. Now, on one hand, when you're designing a clinical trial, you do have a lot of tests that need to be done to be able to assess whether the drug works well and is safe enough. On the other hand, we see the need for more visits at home. Do you have any experience about setting up a clinical trial in the home setting of patients, or the so-called virtual or decentralized trials?
Yes, so I think we do have experience. In fact, we have an ongoing clinical trial which is doing completely decentralized across US, where patients from anywhere in the country can participate from comfort of their home. And so there is clearly mechanisms available nowadays to pharma and other to do clinical trial, which are more patient-centric clinical trial. These are trials I call more patient-centric because they go around the patient. So traditional model of clinical trial is having the patient travel to the center and then have them go back after doing all the assessment. That's not patient-centric, because of various issues, especially myositis. They have traveling issues and many other issues, cost and other livelihood issues. So we are changing the paradigm to make it patient-centric. Rather than patient coming to us, we are going to the patient's home. And nowadays it's possible through home nurse visits, through telemedicine, through remote monitoring of the blood pressure, vitals, getting their questionnaires solved on the computer or on a tablet. Lot of things, technology has made it possible that we can do many assessments in clinical trials and outcome measure studies through remotely. So for some things, maybe patients would have to travel, but for many other things, patient doesn't need to travel. But we continue in our clinical trial design, still continuing them to travel, which I think is a waste of time and resource. But more importantly, it's not patient-centric. It's not the right thing to do in 21st century, where we are so well advanced that we can, do talks like this. Is really not much of difference between me understanding patients' problems via video versus patients sitting in front of me. This almost the same, if not the same. So to me, I think telemedicine, digital health technologies, home nurse visit, remote lab monitoring, all of them are part of the solution to what Bonita was saying. And that decreases the patient's fatigue, patient's problems, and so on.
Thanks for commenting on that, and good to know that there are definitely possibilities to move that direction towards our future clinical trials. So we are coming to the end of this very interesting meeting. And Benita, we learned on top of your disease experience and the time it took to get your diagnosis, we learned so much more from you today. We talked about the relationship with your doctors and how important it is to set up that good relationship with your physician, as well as with your general practitioner, and make that a real teamwork of good communication. Yeah, we also learned about the challenge you have with all your other diseases that come along with dermatomyositis, as well as the concern with COVID still today after the pandemic. I think most importantly, we learned from you that there is still reasons for hope and for to believe in the future and to dream of the future. Whilst wrapping up, I see Wolf brings in another question for Professor Agarwal. Do you think less experienced sites can handle the outcome assessments properly? I guess Wolf is referring to a remote setting.
Yeah, so I think they can. I think that it's upon us, and in a partnership between academic and pharma can really help to develop outcome measures that are more practical and objective. See, when you have a simple, practical, and objective outcome measure, it doesn't matter whether an expert does it or a non-expert does it. Let me give you an example of Fitbit or health, actigraphy or some sort of device where you can give. That's an objective measurement. It doesn't matter if I give a device to Benita or someone else as a non-expert give the device. The device is an objective measurement of the activities that the patient is performing in a daily activity. That's just one example. But what I'm saying is by picking up measures that are simple, practical, and objective, we can decrease the reliance on the expertise that is currently is, and that can help promote better and more meaningful and more patient-centric clinical trials.
Can I say something with that? That was actually something that I forgot to mention was one of the things that several patients and I have had issues with. For example, the muscle test that they do. A lot of those things are not true to life. They'll gently push on my arm for just a second and they'll say, "Oh, your muscles are fine." I'm like, no, because if I try to carry something across the room, I'm about to drop it. And by having it at home, if a home health nurse is watching, they see such a difference in my muscles than what my doctor does when I go in. So I think having it at home and having a home health nurse there, to do part of that would be wonderful information, because my nurse, she's more concerned sometimes than my doctor is, because she sees what it's really like for me to get out of my chair or for me to carry something across the room than just a quick 2-second little muscle test that I can actually hold up long enough to pass the test. And even my PFA walking test, I can pass the test for a minute, but if I'm carrying a load of laundry or trying to carry a load of laundry or something, I lose my breath and I drop to 80 something. So all of that needs to be, I think, taken into account, that not everything in the rushed clinical setting is always true to a myositis patient's life. It needs to be real to the world and what they're having to live with their disease and their muscle fatigue. So I think there's a wealth of information by doing it at home. If it's set up right, if you're sending a home health nurse out to do blood work, maybe they can watch and observe the patient in their real setting a little bit. I think they would learn a lot from that.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that very practical but so eye-opening example, Benita. Conscious of time, we will need to close the meeting here. I'd like to thank all the participants for joining and for your very interesting questions. Zoltan for moderating, Professor Agarwal for your questions, and most importantly, Benita, thank you for taking the courage to share all this with us. We know that is not an easy thing to do, and we wish you many good days like today, and for the patients a better care in the future. So thank you all, and we will close it here. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.